The young and the restless spoilers shock. Under the dim glow of the Forrester Creations boardroom's recessed lights, Claire sat in stony silence, her heart pounding as she replayed the day's revelations in her mind. Ever since Audra had insinuated that her latest cosmetic formula was nothing more than a superficial ploy to distract, the gears of Claire's strategic mind had been set into motion. She knew that Audra had staged the entire disclosure, precisely calculated to pique Kyle's curiosity and compel him to launch his own covert investigation. It was a dirty trick, one that bespoke Audra's willingness to bend truth and loyalty alike in pursuit of personal gain. Steeling herself, Claire understood that she could not rely solely on whispered suspicions. She needed the hard evidence that would expose Audra's duplicity once and for all. She replayed every conversation, memorized every glance of satisfaction that flickered across Audra's face when Kyle showed the slightest hint of obsession. It was a masterstroke of manipulation, and Claire, painfully aware of the subtlety involved, had positioned herself to watch, waiting for the precise moment when the trap would snap shut around her beloved. Meanwhile, Jack Abbott and Diane Jenkins had not been idle observers. Jack, whose own battles with corporate betrayal had hardened him against trusting even those closest to him, recognized the hallmark signs of a Machiavellian scheme. Diane, drawing on her prodigious legal and business acumen, saw in Audra's performance the blueprint of a smear campaign aimed at destabilizing both Claire's professional standing and her relationship with Kyle. Between them, they had conferred in hushed tones behind closed doors, weighing the costs of intervening. They knew that Kyle's protective streak toward Claire could easily tip into willful blindness if their intervention was too blatant, yet the alternative, doing nothing, threatened to undermine everything they held dear. In an uneasy consensus, they agreed to warn Kyle, trusting that a father's and a mother's counsel might penetrate the veil of youth's recklessness. Diane drafted a succinct caution, delivered in Kyle's inbox late one evening: "Think twice before you act. Audra's game is far more dangerous than you realize." Jack's message was simpler, more paternal: "Don't let pride blind you." But pride is a powerful force, and Kyle's youthful tenacity tipped the scales. He convinced himself that he had grown beyond the vulnerabilities of his past mistakes, that he could navigate Audra's labyrinthine motives without falling prey to them. He prided himself on his ability to think independently, to forge his own path, even if it meant bending rules or questioning the advice of those who loved him. When Jack and Diane attempted to broach the subject over dinner, Kyle's irritation flared into anger. He rebuffed Diane's gentle entreaties and brushed aside Jack's firm warnings, insisting that he appreciated their concern but was more than capable of handling the situation. In his mind, acknowledging Audra's treachery would acknowledge his own gullibility. Better, he reasoned, to steamroll ahead, to confront Audra head-on and prove that he would not be manipulated by anyone, least of all a woman whose motives he claimed to respect. In the aftermath, as Jack and Diane exchanged worried glances, Claire alone comprehended the full scope of the damage that Kyle's hubris might inflict. Audra's invitation to collaborate had come wrapped in the guise of mutual ambition. She praised Kyle's commercial instincts, commended his creativity, and dangled the prospect of a shared venture that would elevate both their careers. In truth, she aimed to ensnare him in a scheme so ethically compromised that once he was invested, withdrawal would risk not only his reputation but also the financial viability of his nascent line. Over a series of staged brainstorming sessions, Audra unveiled a set of cosmetic products, visually striking but woefully flawed in formulation. Their textures were grainy, their pigments uneven, and their packaging touted features that the contents could never deliver. Audra insisted that these were confidential prototypes, meant to test Kyle's distribution channels and market feedback processes. Flattered by her deference and eager to establish his own mark in the industry, Kyle agreed to fast-track a limited release, convinced that minor adjustments would rectify any initial missteps. What he did not see was how Audra had engineered these prototypes to collapse under scrutiny, an ugly spectacle designed to rebound upon Kyle's professional standing and isolate him from Claire's circle of support. Claire, having dissected Audra's pattern of deception, tried once more to reach Kyle before the release went live. She confronted him late one evening in the minimalist loft he shared with a friend, her voice a blend of urgency and heartbreak. She laid out the sequence. Audra's faux confession, the suspicious timing of her suggestions, the underwhelming lab reports she had secretly procured from mutual contacts. She reminded Kyle of Jack and Diane's warnings, of his own promise to avoid entanglements that might compromise his integrity. But the sight of politics and pragmatism in Claire's plea only stung Kyle's wounded pride. Misinterpreting her concern as a challenge to his judgment, he erupted in frustration. His words, sharp and unfiltered, accused Clare of doubting his capabilities, of underestimating the maturity he believed he had achieved. He slammed his hand against the polished steel kitchen counter, casting a harsh reflection of himself in the chrome surfaces. In a voice tinged with both rage and sorrow, he told Clare to leave, ordering her to mind her own business and calling her schemes overprotective nonsense. The blow landed like a physical strike. Clare felt her chest tighten, as if her heart had been braced against a vice. Tears welled up, blurring her vision, but she refused to let them spill. Instead, she turned her back, composed herself for a moment, and quietly slipped out of Kyle's loft. The hallway lights left flickering shadows across her silhouette as she retreated into the night, determined to preserve what dignity remained. Her sobs, muffled by her scarf, were the only testimony to the anguish that churned within her. In that moment, everything she had worked for, her trust in Kyle, her faith in their shared future, felt as though it had crumbled to dust beneath the weight of his scorn. Yet even as she fled, Clare carried with her the seeds of resolve. She would salvage the truth, protect her own integrity, and, if necessary, rebuild from the wreckage that Audra's machinations had wrought. In the aftermath of Clare's departure, Kyle was left alone amidst the fragments of their broken conversation. The loft, once a symbol of his burgeoning independence, felt suffocating in its stark silence. He stared at the empty kitchen, at the slight indent his fist had left in the countertop's metallic sheen, and felt the bitter sting of regret creep in. In the distance, the city's lights pulsed with indifferent rhythm, reminding him that life would press on regardless of his personal turmoil. Although he had sought to prove his autonomy, he now faced the sobering realization that autonomy devoid of wisdom could be perilous. Audra's prototypes sat unopened on the counter, their potential for disaster looming like a storm cloud over his ambitions. And somewhere, Clare, his partner in both love and enterprise, navigated her own path through pain and betrayal, armed with knowledge he had refused to heed. The question that now lingered, unspoken yet palpable, was whether Kyle would find the humility to reconcile with Clare before the damage became irreversible. Would he dare to admit his misjudgment, to dismantle Audra's scheme from within, and to restore the trust he had so carelessly shattered? Or would pride continue to blind him, allowing Audra to tighten her grip while he marred the reputation he had striven so hard to build? As the first light of dawn crept through the loft's tall windows, Kyle faced a choice: cling to the illusion of solitary strength, or reach out to the woman whose tears still haunted his conscience, seeking forgiveness and forging a path back to solidarity. The next steps he took would determine not only the fate of his career but the very fabric of his relationship with Clare, and the answer to that pivotal choice would shape their future in ways neither of them could yet imagine. Under the harsh glare of the loft's overhead track lights, Clare recoiled from Kyle's harsh words as though struck by a physical blow. His voice, taut with frustration and wounded pride, echoed in the narrow space where they had once shared laughter and confidences. She had come to plead once more, this time not merely as a lover fearful for his soul, but as a partner desperate to salvage the fragile bedrock of their relationship. She begged him to see reason, to recognize that her insistence had always come from love and a shared vision for the future. But Kyle, his jaw clenched and eyes glinting with defiance, shook his head and launched into a litany of accusations. She was suffocating him, meddling in his affairs, refusing to grant him the freedom he claimed he needed. The loft, usually a sanctuary between the chaos of boardroom battles and late-night strategy sessions, suddenly felt like a gilded cage, each piece of minimalist furniture a reminder of her attempts to shape his destiny, and his furious insistence on crafting his own. Anger rose in Clare's chest like a tidal wave, fueled by hurt and disbelief. She watched as his hand rose in a gesture meant to dismiss her entirely, the years of trust and intimacy vanishing into the cold air between them. In that charged instant, the years of compromise and unspoken tensions converged into a single, explosive moment. Claire's hand snapped upward before conscious thought could intervene, her palm connecting with Kyle's cheek in a sharp crack that reverberated through both their bodies. Time seemed to fracture, as if the world held its breath. Kyle's shock-etched face registered the sting of the slap more deeply than any argument could have. Clare, heart pounding, felt both vindication and horror at her own violence. She had crossed an unthinkable line. Tears welled in her eyes as she struggled to comprehend the enormity of what had transpired, the raw anguish of her betrayal by Audra's underhanded plots, the sleepless nights spent gathering evidence, the countless warnings delivered by Jack and Diane, all culminating in this moment of irrevocable rupture. Yet it was not Audra's treachery that now defined them, but the jagged fissure in their bond, jagged and bleeding. Kyle staggered back as if physically repelled, his posture wounded and defensive. He demanded they end it, no further conversations, no attempts at reconciliation, only the cold finality of a breakup. His words were merciless. He would not endure a partner who failed to support his ambitions, who doubted his independence and cast him adrift with her suspicion. In that moment, Clare saw the full measure of his disillusionment. The man she loved had become a stranger, his soul hardened by wounded ego and fear. As dawn's pale light sifted through the loft's sheer drapes, Clare sank to the plush carpet, her sobs muffled by the weight of her hair and the smooth fibers beneath her trembling form. She reflected on the cruel irony that only she had perceived Audra's duplicity in time, had raced to shield them both from the fallout of distributing those defective prototypes, had fought for the truth while Kyle clung to his illusions. Now her loyalty had been repaid with his violent dismissal and callous rejection. But amid the wreckage of her heartbreak, a resolute clarity began to crystallize. She would not allow Audra's scheme to claim victory over her integrity, nor would she permit Kyle's pride to blind him permanently. Meanwhile, Kyle sat alone at the edge of their silk-upholstered sofa, his cheek throbbing not only from the physical sting but from the echo of something far more searing, the realization that he had severed the one tether that had grounded him in both business and love. In the silent aftermath, guilt seeped into his veins with a cold persistence. His earlier defiance ebbed, replaced by the horror of what he had done. He had lashed out at the person who had always believed in him most fiercely, the person who possessed the very evidence proving Audra's manipulations. The prospect of her tears, of her injury to protect him, struck him with such force that he found himself gasping for breath, as if trapped beneath the weight of his own folly. In that agonizing moment, he grasped the truth he had denied. The slip of his bravado had endangered his career and betrayed the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. Summoning the last remnants of his shattered composure, Kyle rose from the sofa, every movement slow as though wading through treacle. He crossed the distance to where Clare knelt, her shoulders shaking, and knelt beside her. Words failed him at first, his throat constricted with both shame and longing. Finally, he whispered her name, a tentative bridge across the chasm he had carved between them. Clare looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and glistening with unshed tears. In that gaze, he saw both the depth of her pain and an unwavering strength that still reached for him. Swallowing his pride, Kyle pressed both hands over his heart and spoke in a voice raw with contrition, admitting that he had been wrong. Wrong to dismiss her warnings, wrong to hurl accusations born of arrogance, wrong above all to strike out when she had only sought to protect their shared future. He confessed that her slap, though harsh, had mirrored the violence of his own rejection and lit a clarity within him, that freedom without trust is mere loneliness, that ambition pursued alone becomes empty triumph, and that the love between them was worth more than any professional victory. As her tears overflowed, they mingled with his apology, and in that moment of mutual vulnerability, the walls they had erected crumbled. Dawn's first rays bathed them in soft light, illuminating the path toward forgiveness. They embraced, tentative at first, then with growing certainty, knowing that the trials ahead, both in business and in love, would be weathered together. Against the shifting currents of deceit and pride, Claire and Kyle rediscovered the truth at the heart of their bond. That only together could they outmaneuver the shadows cast by Audra's schemes, and that the deepest victory lies not in solitary conquest but in the unbreakable unity of two hearts pledged to one another.